Donald Trump brags about getting the evangelical vote, which he says, Jamie, he got in record. No, of course, everything with Donald Trump is a record, a new world record.
How about the evangelicals? How good was that? A world record. Evangelical Christians. We set the all-time record in the history of elections in this country. Evangelicals.
The world's record, the all-time record. How did he do with the evangelical vote?
Well, he certainly did better than I think a lot of evangelical leaders would have expected. He got over 80% in most exit polls, which is a lot. And it's interesting because of the huge divisions that were within the evangelical leadership community. So, Russell Moore, head of the Southern Baptist Convention's political arm, was a vehement opponent of Trump's since just like last December. And had written all these op-eds and called on all these other people to oppose him. But at the end of the day, it looks like white evangelicals in particular, because this statistic did not carry over to other branches of evangelicalism that were not white. But the white evangelicals in particular were more supportive of him than arguably any other. It's a hard thing to track, like what exactly constitutes white evangelicals now than like 20 years ago. I think world record is kind of a weird way to set it because it's like a thing that only America competes in.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of like the World Series. Like, yeah, we won, we beat Canada. It is true that he did surprisingly well with that demographic.
But some of the leadership, like Franklin Graham, right, was all the way, right?
Absolutely.
Liberty University.
All right. He got
Jerry
Falwell.
Yeah.
And Ralph Reed as well. He managed to pull together this hodgepodge religious right leadership group that is about half traditional religious right leaders and the other half a new breed of prosperity gospel preachers, which was really the first time they'd been politicized. But that was enough. That was enough for him to pull it off.
This is what really, really bothered me, maybe more than anything in the election, which I've talked about on air some, about how my parents, who are Southern Baptist evangelical Christians, were going to vote for Donald Trump. And I found that out well after the sexual assault stuff came out, and they were sticking with Trump. And it really messed with me. Not just because of them specifically, but like, how can you be a Christian?
Yeah, how can they reconcile their Christianity with Donald Trump's life and lifestyle,
Right.
and public statements? And
well, it's interesting to hear the arguments contrary to it. And I actually interviewed an evangelical couple in South Carolina who was pledging to support Trump.
Yeah.
And what they'll say often is they say, well, God uses imperfect vessels.
Oof.
And which is a troublesome theology on multiple levels in terms of how that could go in different directions.
it excuses anything.
Literally anything.
And relatedly, they will also argue that Donald Trump, while he might not be perfect, the argument that they wanted a Supreme Court that would defend their definition of religious liberty was paramount in evangelical circles. Like it mattered more than who was on the ticket, clearly. And we saw that huge statistical flip from 2011 where the overwhelming majority of evangelicals said, look, the morality of my candidate matters. To 2016, the same question, and the overwhelming majority of evangelicals said, no, it more matters with policy.
They also applied a different standard to Bill Clinton,
Right.
than to Donald Trump, to Hillary Clinton, than to Donald Trump, right?
Right. I mean, Ralph Reed himself decried Bill Clinton and said we need morality in our leadership, and then said the exact opposite about Donald Trump this year.
That we use imperfect vessels. What about the religious left, such as it is? And there is a strong religious left.
Absolutely.
And a growing, I think, religious left.
Actually, yeah, and actually in part because of Trump. I had a piece in the Post last week about this, saying that we're starting to see this surge of donations and interest in religious left groups as a response to Donald Trump's election. Part of that has to do with his coming administration's intentional targeting of Muslim Americans and how many of his supporters are anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic or also just anti-progressive Christian. Gay pastors and priests have been victims of hate incidences since Trump got elected. So The advantage for that, for the religious left, is that it's allowed them to coalesce. And so we're starting to see all of these groups show up again. Last week, we had a group of religious leaders decry his cabinet, say it's a cabinet of bigotry. And I think you're only going to see those voices get louder moving forward.